Okay.
You can start.
Okay, great then. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. A warm welcome to all of you for joining us and tuning in for this webinar. This is the first webinar on TNE from DSO perspective, and it's called DSOs and the TNE Regulation Review, Leave No One Behind. I am Zeni Varfia, I'm Policy and Legal Director at EDSO. And on behalf of EDSO, I welcome you here today. I will be your moderator for the whole webinar and for the 1.5 hours today. So I would like right immediately to start with some housekeeping rules. I'm very delighted to be here. So first, when it comes to video and audio, it will be only available for the speakers, panelists, and keynote speakers. So for the rest of the participants, this functionality will not be available. Also not to overuse the streaming connection. When it comes to participant questions, we want to hear you, although we don't see you. So please use the Q&A tool. You are more than welcome to submit your questions there, and we will pick it up and we'll take care of them. We will do our best to reply all your questions and trying to leave no one behind, as our title is today. So please use this functionality. This webinar will be recorded. You will be able to see it in YouTube and EDSO website. Nevertheless, I will kindly ask you to stay with us and use this opportunity to share with us your questions, comments you might have, and remarks. So please stay with us. So the agenda of today is we have lined up an exciting agenda, a wonderful panel, and a very knowledgeable experts for you today. So the first panel will be like a joint introduction about how the TNE regulation and the proposed revision comply with the objectives of the Green Deal, namely leave no one behind, but also about the digitalization and decarbonization of the energy sector, and namely what is the role of DSOs in the new revised proposal. So we have 4 speakers there. I will introduce them very shortly just after the agenda. And then the second panel will go more into depth, talking about how to get more smart grids PCI list, project of common interest. What are the eligibility criteria after this proposed revision? Is somehow this process streamlined, or is still not that incentivizing for the project promoters to use the provision of the TNE regulation? And thereafter will be a Q&A session too, and then the concluding remark by our chair, Christian Buchel. So without any further delay, I will move to the first panel. The 4 speakers are shown to you on the screen. We have 4 contributions, to start with Mr. Christian Buchel, who is the member of the board, but also the director for European territories and citizens and clients at Enedis France, but also the chairman of the EDSO. Welcome, Christian. A warm welcome and good afternoon to you.
Welcome.
Thank you for being with us. Thereafter will be Christoph. Mr. Christoph Goodley is a member of European Parliament since 2019. He's member of Renew Europe, is also the member of ITRE Committee, which is of the Industry, Research and Energy at European Parliament. And more importantly, also the Rapporteur for Energy System Integration Strategy. Welcome, Mr. Grudler. A real pleasure to have you here today. Thereafter, we will have the third contribution. It's Mrs. Aurélie Beauvais. It's a Deputy CEO at Smart Solar Power Europe. Thank you for joining us today and looking forward to hearing from you. Then last but not least, Mr. Thorsten Knopp, a senior expert regulation at E.ON, a very active member of EDSO, but also a very knowledgeable expert in energy system integration. So I'm looking forward to your dynamic exchanges. We will try to keep this webinar as interactive as possible. And without any further ado, I will hand over the floor to our Mr. Buchel.
Thanks very much, Zeni, for moderating this event, and all those in the EDSO team who organized this event. Welcome to all of you. It's a great pleasure. The member of the Parliament, Mr. Christoph Grubler, thanks for being with us. I'm happy to be with Aurélie and Thorsten in this first roundtable. And thanks all who joined this important event. all the panelists and the participants. I'm glad to introduce this workshop on the recast. In fact, it's a recast of the 10E regulation. The European Commission engaged this revision because the current framework does not reflect, or at least not fully reflect the expected changes resulting from the Green Deal objectives, with the upgraded 2030 targets and as well as the 2050 climate neutrality objective. So indeed, several evolutions have to take place in the light of the EU policies, and infrastructure are a key asset to make this policy possible, to leverage this policy and to accompany them. A few weeks ago, I had the great pleasure to present, alongside with our colleagues from Eurelectric, our joint study on distribution grid investment to power to the needed for energy transition. Without any surprise, this study, which is an important study and a huge study all over Europe, this study demonstrates that power grids are critical to enable the energy transition, and they are key for energy demand, electrification, renewable integration, and to empower at the end both the generators, decentralized generators, and the consumers. So based on the EU policies and the decarbonization targets, this study, one, designed different scenarios, second, assessed grid assets to be deployed, and third, estimated the investments needed. For the coming decade, 400 billion euro are needed in power grids in Europe. Electrification and decarbonization, while providing also more resilience. Climate change, unfortunately, means also climate events, so to improve the resilience, to make decarbonization possible and electrification of Europe. All this will require new power lines, reinforcing the existing ones and modernizing the network through digitalization. By developing the smart grids, by strengthening our innovation skills, by enabling the potential of flexibilities, and being fully aware of the crucial role of the data, and including how we transform data through artificial intelligence in the coming years, we as DSOs, I would say we are, as companies, as entrepreneurs, we have already been able to master our destiny. But to go further and at the end, somehow to meet the EU climate targets, we must put into practice the outcomes of this study. We will need to leverage different kind of funding to reach this 400 billion euro. EU funding is one of them, and could enable this investment gap, because there is a gap. And when you look deeper the study, you will see that it's quite different in some countries all over Europe. It's not one fit all, because the history of the electricity power grid is not the same in each country. So several financial instruments do exist at EU level. They have different objectives and scope: research and innovation, attracting private investments, choosing economic and social gaps, etc. Connecting European facilities, the so-called CEF for energy, seems to correspond to our needs. It provides grants to develop infrastructure in the energy sector, but it appears also that over the past years, this CEF funding has been mainly allocated to the electricity and gas transmission infrastructure and to very large projects, which was wonderful because it reflected the energy infrastructure needs at this moment. It means integration and interconnecting the EU energy market, avoiding EU dependency, etc. But only a few smart grids projects were really allocated under these instruments. Now, As I already said, we shifted to new priorities, or I would say a new story in the power grid history, decarbonization and climate neutrality. Distribution grids will have a key role to play in the coming decades. Distribution grids will have a key role to play to facilitate the access to EU funding and safe energy in particular. The legislation framework has to be adapted now accordingly. The recast of the 10E regulation, which drives all these funds, is a key opportunity to unleash this potential of distribution power grids and bring them, help us as companies to play all our role. And this money we do need will contribute definitely and strongly to the energy transition we all around this webinar expect. So many thanks all of you for attending this workshop. No doubt that it will bring a fruitful discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Christian. Very much appreciated. Very insightful information already provided for the next speaker as a challenge to react and to provide their perspective on the issue. Indeed, the DSOs will be at the center of the energy transition. It should be accommodated in the new recast. But let's see what Mr. Grude will come and bring to our attention today. Mr. Grude, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Dear members of the European Parliament, dear representatives and participants, I'm happy to be here today to discuss issues that are at the core of my political commitment for Europe. As the ITRE rapporteur for the own initiative report on energy system integration, I had the opportunity to meet nearly all energy actors, including some of you. This has allowed me to paint a clear picture of what has been achieved so far and what Europe is still in great need of. We are all familiar with the energy trilemma, as the idea that a perfect energy system is one capable of guaranteeing sustainable energy, security of supply, and affordability. I believe energy system integration is that missing link that will allow us to meet all three of those needs. It is the answer to our need for flexibility, efficiency, and further decarbonization. The revision of the 10E regulation is central to the mainstreaming of system integration in our energy policies. 2020 has created the perfect storm to undertake a true shift in paradigm in the way we envision the management of our energy networks. We have had a combination of a major economic and social crisis, an increasingly visible climate crisis, and most importantly, we have reached the first major milestone in our energy and climate policies. Among the big changes that need to happen, I would like to highlight the ones that I will continue to defend all throughout my mandate and beyond. The first one, we need to make 10E a tool for system integration. The time of unreasoned transport infrastructure expansion is over. Now we need to change the core objectives of the regulation to support integration, storage, and flexibility solutions and deployment of renewables in an efficient way. Second one, this in turn should trickle down to the projects funded via the PCI list. All our investment efforts should be redirected toward those goals. Finally, for this introduction speech, we need to change radically the way we plan network development. The TYNDP, you know, the 10-year network development plan has long been dominated by a small number of actors, which no longer represent the complexity and the diversity of our energy system. Now it is time to create a governance system for network management that includes all energy network actors. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goodler. A pleasure to hear your thoughts. We took note some insightful information you provided too about how to change the objective of TNE in the future, how to accommodate the renewables and storage. But just after you, I would like to give the floor to Thorsten Knopp because he has also the view to interlink between the TNE and the system energy integration. Mr. Knopp, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Tsini. I think that there are many parallels between smart energy system integration and what we are looking at, and between the revision of the 10E directive. And the main parallel that I'd like to highlight here in all brevity is that probably we, with the revision of the 10E directive, we are looking at what will happen at the transmission level. And we have lots of discussions, obviously, on the role of gas in the future and on the role of renewable and sustainable gas and on hydrogen. And we are basically discussing how many large transmission gas pipeline projects should still be part of 10E. But I think that an increasingly important focus should be on the small scale instead, and it should be on smart grids. Because smart grids probably are the tool to make the energy transition work. And that's the 10E, where I recognize that not only currently, but also in view of the revision, we are looking a lot, which is completely justified. We are looking a lot at large scale developments, while maybe we should look a bit more into small scale possibilities. And I think the same one is, to a certain extent, true for a smart energy system integration. We are asking ourselves, how can we produce lots of hydrogen? How many offshore wind power do we need? We are asking ourselves, which industry sectors are hard to abate? These are all extremely important questions, but I have the impression that there's not enough focus on the small scale where systems really come together. And energy systems, that's what we are convinced of, come together at the local and regional level. It's there where they should be integrated in the first place, because the energy transition is built bottom up through this optimized energy system of different size. And the smallest optimized energy system is probably the active customer or the consumer, and then gets larger and larger and larger. But not only, of course, but also look at these possibilities in smart energy sector integration. And how do we get these together? How do we get electricity, gas, hydrogen, district heating together at a local level, at a regional level? And we'll probably have to take a look at roles, at responsibilities, at interfaces, of course, between system operators for electricity and gas and district heating, but also at interaction with third parties, and how do we provide incentives, for example, in the right places for energy efficiency to really have optimized energy systems at these small scale. And where it all comes together is that I think both need legislative focus. 10E needs a legislative focus on how more smart grid projects can be within the framework of funding, and how we can also supply sufficient funds in order to make these innovative projects work, and then realize them as an example also for something else. And also for smart energy system integration, we should also take a look at this, and we should take a look at how do we provide the proper framework also on a European level to enable system operators and market actors to get systems together, electricity and gas and heat and maybe parts of mobility on this local and regional level. And so I think that the two have a lot of common with each other, and so I'm very happy that Mr. Grudler is attending this session, because I think he's really into the two, and it's crucial now if we want, how do we want to structure the future, how do we want to structure decarbonization, and how do we want to structure the energy transition? Is it an exercise at large scale only, or do we build the framework both with 10E and with energy system integration to structure it bottom up through these small and medium-sized units building on each other? Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Torsten. Thank you for your contribution. And without any further delay, I will give the floor to Ms. Aurélie Bouvet. As you are representative of the Solar Power Europe, we would like and will be delighted to hear from you. What are the challenges from the solar industry? How this revision or proposed revision is fitting for purpose and combined with the climate neutrality objective? Please, Aurélie, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Zeni. I had 2 slides maybe to show. I don't know if we can share it now. Perfect. So as a starting point for the conversation, we thought it would be useful to share with you some of the insights from the study we released in May, which is the first 100% renewable scenario to achieve climate neutrality, which was produced in the Brussels Fora and by our association less than a year ago. And what you can see in front of you is that the key to achieving an energy system with very high shares of renewable, because we not all have to go for 100%, remains in any case very strong electrification. So I think our scenario turned out to be the one with the highest electrification shares amongst all the stakeholders from the energy sector. And this is driven by the fact that high electrification rates will be important not only for direct electrification, but also to produce in the very near term, and I know it's also an important topic for you, Mr. Grudler, renewable hydrogen. So always when we think about the hydrogen debate, we need to remember that the starting point remains electricity grids. If we go to the next slide, we also wanted to deep dive a bit on what does it mean in terms of additional installed infrastructure, and the breakout for the solar sector. And what you can see on the graph on your left, this is not from our own scenario, that's the IEA actually, which forecasts a huge growth of distributed installation, notably in the solar sector in the next years. The IEA very often is conservative when it comes to forecasts, and yet what you see is that in the next years, distributed installations, which combine residential as well as commercial and industrial installations in the solar sector, will at the end of the day account for half of the installations we will have in the solar sector. And that's very important because indeed those installations are usually connected to the low and medium voltage, and those installations require very extensive investments in distribution grids. So I can only subscribe to everything that has been said before. It is also actually aligned with the Eurelectric study that Christian mentioned earlier, which shows that 70% of the new installed installation by 2030 will be distributed. What you see on your right is also interesting. That comes from our 100% renewable study. And we wanted not only to model the transition across each of the regions that we have been covering, we wanted to see what it meant when it comes to trading across regions. Will we need a lot of cross-border trade, in which case transmission infrastructures are definitely important? Or will we have, on the contrary, a model where most of the electricity that is produced is actually consumed locally? And what we found out was really an incredible propension for in-house consumption, kind of. So in each energy region, almost 90% of what is produced is consumed in the same region and not traded cross-border. So that really shows once again that distribution grids in general and low and medium voltage grids will have a very important contribution to achieving a climate neutral energy system and also to supporting the flexibility of the system. What we don't see here is, for example, the very important contribution we found when it comes to distributed storage to enable, notably on a daily basis, the optimization and the security of supply of the system. So we found that it is possible to have a secure supply with 100% renewable electricity supply, but it will need a lot of distribution grids, a lot of storage, and a lot of demand response. And I think I can only subscribe to what was said before. We strongly believe that the TENI, which is the key driver today to trigger new investments in infrastructures, is certainly not fit for purpose currently. Maybe I will go slightly beyond scope, just to remind two important elements which are very important when we talk about decentralization. Decentralization, it is also a lot of jobs. What we found out in various studies we produced is that when you look at distributed renewable installations, you actually create 3 times more jobs than for large ones. So that is definitely important to take into account when we look at contributing to the green recovery, also for the important investments we have ahead. And that is why back in the days, 2 years ago, we built a huge coalition around the need to support distributed installation, which was called Small is Beautiful. A second element which was brought up by Christian earlier is also the very strong correlation you find between decentralization, innovation, and industrial leadership. And when we talk about upgrading our grid and focusing much more about distribution, we also talk about supporting the industrial and technological leadership that our companies have today in Europe when it comes to smart grids and digitalization. That is an area where we still have a very strong competitive edge against the rest of the world. And this is a very important moment to support this competitive edge also via the TENI. I'm sure we will have more time to deep dive about the specific recommendations on the TENI later on. But indeed, I think it's time to make the TENI more agile, meaning more able also to cope with the fast growing pace of technologies. Very recently, 2 big companies, Scania and Volvo, have announced, for example, that they will only do electric vehicles. That will have very strong impacts when it comes to the infrastructure. And so long-term planning is good, but agility, especially in this period, is very important. So we need to be able to plan for a long time, but also to take into account those fast developments. And I can only agree that we need to evolve on the notion of project of common interest, and that today, from our perspective, investing in our distribution grid is definitely of the interest of all Europeans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aurélie. Thank you for your very wonderful contribution. Glad to hear a few key words were mentioned by all our panelists, and then I will leave the floor to Q&A session. It's flexibility, agility, decarbonization, how to increase investments, and of course, flexibility come again. I have a question before we open up. First, welcome to 150 attendants at the moment. A warm welcome to you who joined a little bit later. And thanks for tuning in today. We are happy to have you here with us. I have a question for Mr. Buchel. You mentioned that the investments are quite important from the study, and I invite you to read the study, which is a joint study by Euroelectric and EDSO together with Deloitte. We have published, and a connection to the link, it's provided to you in the chat box. You can have access to it in detail. 400 billion investments are needed, but on the other side, we are also conscious that the European Commission has brought to our attention that CEF funds should be used reasonably and not should be overburdened. So other kind of investments should be looked. And I have a question to you in the first place, Ms. Buchel, in terms of how these investments will be looked at. Where do you think we can find other possibilities for these investments to happen in the future, specifically for the regulated business as distribution operators?
Thanks, Tseni, for this first question. And let me thank also my colleagues, and I think to your question, we do already have studies. You just mentioned the study of Electric and EDSO together with Deloitte. Aurélie mentioned and presented the study I have seen deeper several weeks ago, Aurélie, from solar power. We have also some interesting studies coming more from the IT world, I would say, which are also very important partner of the DSOs, yes, because to develop, and it's your question, yes, this money and the 400 billion euro, sorry, is not only in copper and transformer. It's to make possible the development of sector integration. It has been said by Mr. Grüller very well. It has to contribute to make possible the development of, I would say, local flexibility markets. It's about IT. It's about giving value, economical value. Already just mentioned the development of electrical vehicles, and with different producers who announced that they will only develop electrical vehicles. This means that we have to develop the grid, and Mr. Röhler, you mentioned very rightly the TY and NDP regulation. We do need, and the planning of this grid, we do need to give value to the flexibility, flexibility both on consumption side and on generation side. And to develop this, it's a new way of developing the grid. It's a grid with copper and transformer. We still need it, absolutely, yes. But we do need much more IT. And this is one of a key message, that it's digitalization is it's some kind often as a buzzword, but what is behind digitalization? It's IT, it's giving value and to the data, and all this, and this means that the DSOs, and I stop with this, the DSOs are connected with all the partners on those represented by Aurélie, on just investors in solar, equipment companies, all your members, and all the others, and at the end, the consumer. So we do need to partner with all this, but yes, the regulation needs to be more agile, has been said, and more integrate the local aspect mentioned by Thorsten Knopp.
Thank you, Christian, very much for your straightforward answer. I have a question to all of you. This is addressed to all the panelists of this first panel. It's about when you look the revision for the proposal for revision of 10E regulation, impact assessment that has been provided also by the Commission. The role of DSOs has been quite recognized, that we are in the middle of the energy transition. We will be important actors. Our role should be accommodated. But do you see in the text proposed that this has been reflected enough? And how ambitious is that text towards the new role of DSOs? So
maybe if I can answer, because I'm sorry I have to leave you very quickly.
Yes.
And thank you for this very interesting discussion. If you have more questions, I'm here, I'm in the Parliament. At the Parliament, you can ask by email, for example. But about the 10E proposal about the role of DSOs, for me, it's clear. The new EU DSO entity should have more than a consultative role in the TY NDP. It should be a full party in the elaboration of the methodology and the scenarios. DSOs should also have a say in the reports on infrastructure gaps. In fact, all actors should be included, storage operators as well. Once again, for me, a consultation is not enough. That I want to say, to conclude before leaving you, is that what I hear today in this interesting webinar confirm what I believe. The distribution grids and digitalization are the next frontier in energy policies. 10E will have to step up its game to support and include the DSO. I will continue to fight for it in the E3 committee, where my report on energy system integration will be voted on the 18th of March, and I will work very closely with my colleague Claudia Gammon, which is in charge of 10E regulation in my group, Renew, to make 10E a real instrument of system integration. Thank you very much for this invitation, and see you another day.
Thank you very much,
Mr. Grubler. Let me just on behalf of all DSOs in Europe, thank you deeply and warmly for your commitment and strong involvement in all these issues. Thanks very much, Mr. Grubler.
Thank you, Mr. Bushel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grubler. A pleasure to have you here today. And it's good that Mr. Grubler mentioned the EU DSO entity, and the entity in the making. Very challenging, and which has been fortunately accommodated in the new proposed revision. So this is already a positive step in recognition of the role of DSOs in the future, and namely also on the TYNDP. But let's look at the questions from our audience. I would like to see what we have. We have 3 questions. I will start with the first one. I'll try to summarize. From Susan Nies. She says that excellent event, would be interesting to understand how 10-year revisions, smart grid indicated, but also the work that Mr. Mazaiti has been leading on network efficiency are related. And secondly, I would be keen to understand how DSOs see the role of optimization of network through new technologies, the implementation of so-called NOVA principles. And she further complements her suggestion and question. In my country, investments only for high voltage transmission is 100 billion euro until 2030. And this is 1.52% of the German budget year per year. So may I address this question to Thorsten Knopp, please?
Thanks, Zini. I think Susanne definitely has a point there, and she, of course, she also knows the business, and she asks a reasonable question. What we do indeed all together strive to do is to make decarbonization possible as efficiently as possible. And as efficiently as possible, of course, means using all the different means that are available whenever a certain solution is more efficient than another one. And one of the key drivers, again, is smart grids. Smart grids that not only incorporate system operators having more observability and more controllability, especially of distribution grids, but also using flexibility in the right amount, and then again bringing energy systems together on this local level. I think that will be a crucial contributor, not to invest more than it absolutely needs to be in transmission, but in this case in particular in distribution grids, and to enable us to achieve decarbonization at a cost that is in the end the best that we can achieve, and that is also acceptable to society. So this topic here, how do we fund smart grids through 10E, and how do we enable energy systems to come together through smart grids at a local level, is exactly at the core of your question, and will save a lot of unnecessary investment.
Thank you, Thorsten. Thank you very much. I will move to the next question. Georgia Konkas, and she said, shall we adopt the definition of cross-border impact in the 10E to enable development and finance smart distribution grids and solutions? Or shall we create a different framework and different criteria for distribution grids? May I address this question to Aurélie Beauvais, please?
Yes, happy to. I see Christian has a hand raised as well, so I don't know if you wanted to make a quick point. No? Okay. All right. So I think, unfortunately, hi, Georgia, former dear SPE colleague. I think I don't have a straightforward answer, but I think clearly we need more EU funding. Clearly we need to strengthen the focus of the 10E. Is it a different criteria, a different regimen, or do we have to broaden the current scope? I don't have a strong opinion on this, and maybe Christian and Torsten do. But I think we also need maybe to go broader than that. That's a bit out of the scope of the TNI, but I think to finance distribution networks, we also need to review our network tariffs and our incentive schemes. And that will have to go together with the TNI review. And I think it also answers another question in the chat, which is how can we keep all of this affordable for the EU citizens, pointing out that, for example, in Germany, electricity prices are very high. I understand that. And if you look at electricity prices today, you see that actually the network part of these prices is increasing year on year. And that's also due to the fact that today renewables are a cost, not a benefit from a DSO or from a TSO perspective, because they are not appropriately remunerated for that, probably, but also because we don't have a value for flexibility. And on the other hand, when we did our 100% renewable scenario, it turned out that it was cheaper than doing nothing, which is incredible, we would think. So actually, if you develop in a smart way your infrastructure, and if you develop flexibility sources, you reduce significantly the need for new grid investments, also transmission infrastructure, which can be extensively expensive and long to build if you focus much more on the local network. So I think this question is very crucial. That's good to raise it, keep it affordable for the citizen. But I think we have solutions for this. We just need to take a different perspective.
Thank you very much, Aurélie. I believe you also replied somehow to the question from Salome Gonzalez, which is, she mentioned the high prices in Germany. Yes, please, Christian, if you would like to take the floor.
It was just to add maybe two elements to the first two questions. Yes, on the second one, I think we do need both. Yes, we do need to extend definition because it's a reality that it's not either transmission or distribution, it's both, and it's both very strongly together. It's very strongly together. And as EDSO, we are strongly connected with ENSOE, and the new body, the EU DSO entity, will cooperate deeply with it. So yes, we do extend definition and to demonstrate that it's one system, but we do need also new topics. I mentioned, for example, the IT. We do need to develop local markets around flexibility. This is one element, and the second one is more linked to the questions of Suzanne. There are very concrete investments we still need in Europe, because in the introduction I mentioned the fact that it's not the same situation in all the countries all over Europe. And when you look the deployment of, I said with other words, to use data so that suppliers, aggregators, market players can offer the best for their customer, they need data. And to have more data, you do need smart meters. And smart meters, there is a regulation in Europe, but we are not at the end of the story. So very concretely, it's not finished with the development of smart meters in Europe, and it's only the start of a new history and story about giving value to data.
Thank you very much, Christian. I don't know, Torsten, if you would like to react to that question as well, or?
In the context, I think that there was a very interesting contribution from Rainer Lüttke, who's, I think he's from Energate Messenger, in the chat, who contrasted the limited Connecting Europe facility funds with the huge investment requirements. And I think that indeed, and one of the topics that is currently discussed in view of the 10E revision is how and under which conditions should projects that are recognized as being projects of common interest, in addition to Connecting Europe facility funding, also be eligible if the member states opts to receive support from member states. And I think Rainer's question is at the heart of this. in stating this is all very nice and it's extremely helpful, and 10E is a requirement, but 10E cannot shoulder the whole burden. We probably in many cases we need additional support, so it has to be a facilitator in order to get additional support from member states where this is necessary.
Thank you, Torsten, and thank you very much, all of you, for the good questions. Thank you. I see you have raised hand already. If you would like to react.
Yes. I think I will use my dominant position as a speaker to bypass everyone on the chat and ask a question to Christian. Sorry, but I just thought, because there was the element of data which was mentioned, and it's very important for everything we're discussing actually. Who owns the data, and how can we jointly create, well, this actually collective pool of data, which is gathering the pool of data that maybe TSOs have and they use to develop their TYNDP. We know in the TYNDP, we don't have today the distribution perspective, even though we've worked hard with ENSOE to improve that, and they know it, we also see it's not easy. On the distribution side, you have your own data, but so how do you envisage to channel into the TYNDP process? How do you envisage the role of EDSO in this and the coordination in terms of data ownership? Because on our side as well, solar players, we have data when it comes to building grids and distributed installations, but it is also a data which today is valuable and valued on the market. So I think it's a very important point.
Yes, I can add to the, it's more a question already, thanks. My answer is not about the legal aspects, yes, who owns the data, because we can discuss for hours, yes, on legal aspects. For sure, the data coming from the smart meters, the consumer as a private customer, yeah, or generator, private customer, is it, if we speak about solar panels, for example, they own the data. We as DSO and TSO, we enable this data by respecting strictly, I would say, the property of the data from consumer and avoiding to come into privacy question. Yes, this is our duty, our deep duty on smart meters side. But your question is very, very important already, because how we organize it together. I just said that this one system, it's not TSO on one side and DSO on the other one. And you see, it's very different if you have one DSO in the country or 1,000 DSOs, yes? And between two neighbors, Germany and France, it's quite different on DSO side. So we have to cooperate, and there are very good examples. We cooperate very well with our colleagues from RTE in France, our colleagues from Netherlands. They developed a common platform, data platform, as you probably know. The same in Austria, and there are other examples. Sorry, I don't want to mention all the very, very smart examples, but yes, we have to cooperate. And this is why the question about should we extend the existing definition within 10E or adding new topics, both is needed. Both is needed, but at the end, the cooperation between the systems is absolutely key between TSO and DSOs. I'm happy as chairman of EDSO that the cooperation with ENSOE is very, very, very active, and we have the same vision after we are coming from different horizons, and it's different in each country, but we have the same vision, definitely.
Thank you, Christian. We are running a little bit out of time, but I would like to pick the last question in the Q&A tool, and I will give you 23 seconds if it's all right. And the question is about what concrete applications do you see for potential synergy between 10E and transport energy network for transport? So, Torsten, may I give you this question? And what role does hydrogen play? This is the most important, because I know that some of our attendants are interested about hydrogen. You mentioned that this is part of energy system integration. Mr. Gudler touched upon it too, but we would like to hear what do you suggest to that question?
Well, to pick up on the transport first, and probably the same thing also applies to hydrogen. if we really look at the local and regional aspect of 10E, which is smart grids and enabling smart grids that are cross-border or have cross-border effects, then these smart grids, as I said, make sense if you bring energy systems together. And I mentioned electricity, gas, hydrogen, and heat. But also this can apply to mobility concepts. We need to have proper incentives for the correct mobility concepts. We need to have an idea of how mobility is organized, what the energy part of mobility will be on a local and regional level. And in that kind, wherever it makes sense, not everywhere, but wherever it makes sense, integrate mobility into these smart integrated energy systems. And the same in the end, apart from all discussions about hydrogen and how to transform gas infrastructure and what role hydrogen should play, the same probably will also apply to hydrogen on a local and regional level. It is definitely and will in the future be part, at least, of some of these integrated energy systems.
Thank you very much, Torsten. I would suggest to move to the second panel. For the remaining questions, we will be happy to follow up with you individually if that is all right. The second panel, thank you very much, all of you of the first panel. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you for replying to the questions. Very interesting question from the attendants. Thank you very much. Let's move ahead. So the second panel, we have 5 contributors. The first one being Tomasz Sipos, who is the head of regulatory affairs at Zabados Lewecka. Then we will move to Lisa Fischer, Program Leader Energy System and E3G. Welcome, Lisa. Welcome, Thomas. Thereafter, we will have as a speaker Julia Wasiewska, which is a scientific working for Joint Research Center of the European Commission. She will bring us today her perspective as a researcher, but also as one of the persons in charge of the PCI list. So welcome, Julia. Good afternoon to you. Richard Venetiocchi, who is Political Affairs Manager at E.ON in Germany, but also E.DSO member, very active member, has been working quite intensively on the 10E revision. And he will speak about what are the main shortcomings of 10E revision. Thank you, Richard, for being here with us today. And last but not least, Wolfgang Vittorio Di Vincenzo, Energy Attaché in the permanent representation of Italy to the EU. Wolfgang, a pleasure to have you here today.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Very much welcome. So without delay, we'll start with Tomasz Sipos. Thomas, you have prepared a few slides for us today. I would like you to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Sunny. Thank you very much for inviting me to this event and to let me share our views and our thoughts when it comes to PCI projects. In the PCI arena, our company is active currently with 2 ongoing PCI projects. We have 2 projects in the smart grid area. The project is the first one is the project ACAN, and the second one is the project Danube Grid. Just to mention and just to realize that the value and the complexity of the projects. So in case of the project ACAN, we are speaking about a project of 2 DSOs that is valued at almost 200 million euros. And in case of project Ingrid, we are speaking of a project of 2 DSOs and 1 DSO as promoters, and the value of the project is approaching 300 million euros. So also these basic data are as an introduction just to show the difference between the PCI project and the standard DSO project, because this is quite a topic that is often discussed. That what is the difference in constructing a PCI project in the smart grid area between a standard business as usual project. So on this slide, we are highlighting the key differences that we have identified jointly with our project partners. Is first of all, it was mentioned also in the previous panel, the cooperation between TSOs and DSOs. From our experience, this is really something new in the case of a PCIs, because DSOs are forced to cooperate at an international level, and among other difficulties, this is creating also kind of a language issue that needs to be solved. So you need to prepare common position, common statements in one single language, and as well as the communication between TSOs and DSOs. This is something different that distinguishes a PCI project from a standard, for instance, construction of a line within the DSO area. The other aspect that is distinguishing is the complexity. As I mentioned at the very beginning, our projects are valued at 200 million and 300 million euros. So again, it's a huge complexity that is containing several investments, and this is really distinguishing also the management and the realization of a PCI compared to a standard DSO project. And another feature that so far has not been discussed is the regulatory impact. Because when we are speaking about the PCIs and the PCIs co-funded by the European funds, so there is a so-called no-profit rule. It means that the part of the assets that is co-financed cannot be part of the regulatory asset base. So also DSOs need to calculate and need to take into account this feature of a PCI project when it comes to calculating the future profitability of the company. The other feature that we highlighted is setting milestones. Usually, at least in our region, DSOs are not really used to have concrete milestones communicated to the regulators or to state authorities, and they need to report on fitting into these milestones. In case of a PCIs, once you sign an agreement with INEA, you have to be in line with the milestones with regards to the construction. And the other feature that we're mentioning here is regular reporting. It is something that is co-creating the complexity that a part of regular reports to national authorities, PCI must also report to the European Commission, to ACER, to national authorities. It is something that is set also in the regulation, but it is something new that is distinguishing PCIs from business as usual projects. The other dimension that, from our opinion, DSOs are not really suited for or not really experienced is wide communication activities. Usually, at least again in our regions, in the case of the Slovakia, Czech Republic, and Hungary, what we have experienced, the DSOs were not really the best when it comes to communicating the activities, making leaflets, events about constructions of grids. In case of a PCIs, it is kind of a precondition that you need to make also public consultations, and you need to let the public know what you are willing to construct within the PCI. And the final element is the third-party expertise. If you imagine that you are putting together 2, 3, or even 4 companies, you definitely need to have an independent body that is acting as a mediator in all these issues. So these are the key points that are distinguishing a PCI project as defined in the current regulation from a standard as usual project. And why it is worst, despite of this of these differences, to become a PCI project, I'm highlighting on the next slide that when it comes to a PCI project, there are definitely some benefits that are very much in favor of the projects. First of all, the permit granting process. I think it's a general issue when it comes to constructions at the DSO level that the process of obtaining permits is rather complex. In case of a PCIs, this process is set within the regulation, and it is limiting the maximum time for public authorities to issue the relevant permits. Then there is a feature of a single national contact point that is easing very much the communication for DSOs when they have some issues to be communicated to European bodies or at the national level as well. One of the greatest advantages of PCIs when it comes to the constructions is the eligibility of PCIs for CEF funding. I think it was mentioned also in the previous panel, but it needs to be highlighted that PCI status itself is not granting any money for the project. PCI is just an instrument to identify some key projects in the European Union, and then afterwards these projects are eligible to require or to apply for grants from the Connecting Europe Facility financial instrument. And then public acceptance, I already discussed. PCI projects need to have public awareness. So you need to communicate your project, you need to, and this on the other hand is then easing the task of a DSOs when it comes to the acceptance of the project in the concrete region. And one of the final points, it's again a feature routing from the regulation itself. It's the priority status that is granted to the project, and it states that the project shall have granted the highest priority that is available in the country. So these are the key benefits. And finally, what I would like to highlight are 3 points. That first of all, when it comes to the definition of smart grids in the regulation, the definition is very general. So you can really focus and you can really build a very complex projects, because from our opinion, no limitations excluding the low voltage level are not really involved in the regulation. So the regulation as it is set, even though now, is allowing quite a big flexibility for DSOs to define a rather complex smart grid project. The other point I would like to highlight is that PCI status itself is really just providing the elite status for the project. What could be interesting maybe also for discussions is a kind of a connection between the PCI and the newly discussed recovery and the resilience facility, whether PCIs shall be somehow also treated in a priority way when it comes to the constructions, because it was mentioned also in the questions, the budget for PCIs is rather limited. So maybe get together kind of a co-financing for PCIs also from the RF to find a synergy between these two instruments. So these were the thoughts that I was willing to share with you. And if there are some questions, I'm more than happy to reply to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you for showing us the way how to benefit from PCI list, the complicated process. Thank you for the detailed guidance and the nature of this PCI list. Lisa, I would like to give the floor to you and see what is your perspective of PCI list. How do you see the whole implication of the eligibility of the PCI list and how the project promoters can benefit from it?
Thank you very much, Jenny, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa Fischer. I work for E3G. We're a think tank working on climate change. I lead our program on climate neutral energy systems. But yeah, now to the topic really. The key thought I wanted to leave with you today is that when it comes to smart grids, if we want them to be more than just an afterthought in our energy system, we need to change some of the fundamentals of how we make choices in the energy system. And I think some of that has sort of bubbled up in the conversation in the first panel already. And 10E is an opportunity there. I think there's other legislative initiatives this year that might be worth thinking about in this respect. I did want to originally kick off with really just some early brief thoughts on why do we need smart grids, but I feel like that's been covered really well, so I don't want to dive into that. The only thing I did want to mention was very interesting study last week in the UK around clean energy portfolios, and that includes the smartening of the grids and providing a real alternative to more thermal generation in terms of security of supply. So that's definitely one to look into in terms of the benefits and cost savings associated with smart grids and also stability of our energy system. But then I want to really go straight into what are some of the barriers in terms of getting smart grids off the ground and how can 10E help with that. I mean, I think two things I wanted to mention. The first thing is I don't think we have a real process at the moment for valuing distributed resources, and I think that's something that's come up in the conversation. So at the moment, there's no way of establishing whether, for example, an investment at local level or an investment into the digitization of grids could displace for the need for investment at TSO level. So we have no way of really optimizing the system around that question. And that's really what we need in terms of keeping the costs down and then also in terms of a fast transition. And I wanted to point the audience to examples we're seeing in the US where in many states, third parties can participate in utility planning processes, for example. Those sort of, as a result, more sophisticated energy system models have been developed, and there have been many instances where sort of that original planning has been challenged, and the value of local system resources has been integrated much more into the overall energy system planning. So I think there's some innovation emerging here in the US, for example, worth looking into. And that leads me to my second point before I come to the specifics of 10E, but it's really about, we need to crack the problem of how we're making choices over energy investments and energy priorities in the system. We have at European level, for example, we have the long-term strategy and the modeling behind that, which is great and immensely useful, but it's of course many pathways. So it could translate into a big range of realities. And it's also disconnected still from what happens at member state and EU level in terms of infrastructure planning, which is, as many have mentioned, dominated by transmission system owners. And through that, we're really missing out in delivering some of the critical value to consumers and citizens here from the energy transition. And there's another example in this context I wanted to point you towards. There's a live discussion in the UK on how to reform energy infrastructure governance. Ofgem, the UK regulator, has recommended an independent system operator and recommended to really separate out network planning and network operation, precisely for those reasons, because we need to make optimal decisions. And for that, you need an independent look at the energy system. That brings us really neatly, I think, to 10E, but perhaps also to some of the other legislations to be proposed this year. But the role of 10E is really in terms of giving direction in terms of the EU energy system, where are we moving towards, what do we need for an integrated energy market. And I think at the heart of that is modernizing our governance and modernizing it in a way that we value the different energy solutions we have out there, and smart grids and local solutions are very much part of that. In the same depth as other solutions in terms of how they can contribute to our energy system transition and essential services. We need to put demand side services, local solutions at par with supply solutions here. And I think that's really the bottom line in terms of 10E. I think that the Commission proposal goes some way in recognizing that issue, but it hasn't really, apart from sort of adding stakeholders, it hasn't really sort of cracked that problem of how do we actually optimize decision making, and how do we ensure we get the same depth of expertise reflecting the range of energy solutions we have out there into the process. I think there's still significant bias in the setup. So I think that's a key one, and from there flows all the other bits. I think questions have been popping up around specific criteria on smart grids. I think in the 10 proposal, you still have a sort of imbalance on how smart grids are being treated compared to smart gas grids, for example. There's a much higher barrier for electricity grids, so that's definitely something to look into. But before I wrap up, I think so for 10E that the key piece is really the planning stage that needs modernizing and reforming in order to give a lift and boost to smart grids. And I think and then it gives that direction also for national plans, national allocation of funding, and so on and so forth. That means that the effect is much beyond the direct scope of 10E. But I did want to point to, I think 10E isn't where it finishes. I think we're looking to reform gas markets. At the moment, gas, one of the key things it provides in terms of the power sector is flexibility, but we have so many other solutions out there now to provide flexibility in the market, and smart grids are one of them. So we also need to look at moving away from gas and gas competition here and really bring in those solutions. So I think there's a lot to be done this year to give smart grids the boost they need. I'll wrap up here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for your insights and your perspective. You started with a positive note. There is an opportunity and how to optimize the use of PCI list, but of course there are some barriers. We need to acknowledge them, and that's why we are here today. But in the same line, I would ask Ricard Venetiopi to take the floor. He has been carefully, very meticulously looking at the 10E revision, but even before, when the whole procedure of the proposal for the revision started, and even the previous text in 2013, how it reflects actually the incentives for the project promoters. Do they make any benefit? What is the situation for the regulated business as DSOs? I would like you, Ricard, to guide us here today. So please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for that, Seni. Yes, you are correct. I've been following PCIs and 10E for some time now, because E.ON as a DSO has quite some experience on the topic. And I believe the topic of this panel is how to get more smart grid PCIs, because currently, as you know, we only have 6 projects on the current PCI list. And I think that this event, for example, a great initiative by E.DSO, is one of these things, how it can contribute. Another thing is that the PCI Energy Days by the Commission is also it's a very good arena to exchange, meet new colleagues and exchange views, get in touch with JRC and the Commission and learn more about this process, because this process can be quite scary. And that is the input we have received at E.DSO as well, that a lot of DSO, they don't even dare to get into the process because it seems so complicated. It seems like the criteria is too difficult to meet. So therefore, this revision is very well welcomed, I would say. And the general view is that the Commission has done a very good job with their proposal, even though there are a few details left to be worked on. We have seen that there's a clear positioning towards renewables, hydrogen are being recognized, oil will no longer be supported, for example. And so what else could be done? I would say that the main point we hear is it is actually the 10 kV threshold in the criteria for smart grid projects. And this has been changed now. I mean, it's not, the criteria is not explicitly excluding 10 kV, but the line has more or less has been removed. So it would be interesting to find out what this actually means. If low voltage is currently eligible in this projects or not. And when it comes to the finances, which you brought up, so that is one of the major issues currently that I face working in a group with activities in different member states, because the incentives and the finances, the grants, which are coming from CEF in this case, are treated different in different member states, and that is up to the national regulators to sort of set the right incentives. And we have a lot of good examples. Like in some member states, you can, for example, you are allowed to receive regulatory depreciation on the assets which are being financed, but in some member states there's absolutely nothing, which means that you will receive a grant from the EU. But you cannot yield any profit or revenues from these assets. While at the same time, these assets will actually increase your OPEX. And OPEX are often object to efficiency requirement. And that can create a negative business case. So when I speak to colleagues in some units and tell them about PCIs, TENI, connecting your facility, and they simply answer me like, well, this will take a lot of resources. It's a complicated process, takes a lot of FTEs, and we are actually losing money on it. It doesn't make sense. So therefore, we would like to see some kind of push during this revision to make sure that we are not at least losing money by taking on these projects, which are beneficial for the European energy system. And that is what the consequences might be, that if there are no incentives to actually look across the border and see what can we do to actually support the integration of energy systems. There might be local optimization rather than cooperation. So I see that as a big threat and something that I hear a lot within E.ON. And we believe that, currently there's an opportunity to do something about it. We could, besides the recognition of the depreciation, there could, for example, be some kind of smartness bonus, for example. The bonuses doesn't necessarily have to come from CEF or from the EU budget. There was a question on the first panel where someone asked, they highlighted, we heard all these big numbers about all the billions which has to be invested in the energy system, and in comparison, the very small budget from CEF. So this cannot entirely be financed by EU. That is pretty clear. So perhaps there could already be incentives on the EU level, which is then being compensated on the national level. We already have a up and running, well-functioning process when it comes to the PCI selection process. So that could be used as basis. I really like that point from the previous panel. So that could be used as a basis to incentivize and not necessarily just drain the CEF budget with all these projects. And another point I want to make is also that we must also have this in mind again, that currently there's a lot of everyone wants to be in the PCI tenure regulation currently and eligible for CEF, and it would simply not work from several perspectives. And yeah, so we understand that there must be quite large-scale projects, but still, even though these projects will be sort of large-scale, taking place on high, medium voltage, there should still be a possibility to include low voltage assets, because some are even saying that how can a project be a smart grid project if you can't even include the lower voltage loads? And in order to respect the time limit, I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Very much welcome your input on this very challenging topic, but you gave some answers already about smart bonuses could be an option to increase the incentives, and this could be looked at. But indeed, you open also the floor for some reflection and advocacy work for the persons or possibilities that not everybody can be integrated in the PCI list. So some advocacy work for some of the associations to push forward and to see also local projects, how can they be eligible under the new PCI list. But let's move to the other speaker, which is in the same line, I believe, with the reflection that Richard brought to us. Thank you, Richard, very much. Julia, you are young in age, young researcher. You have been very much hands-on on the research about how the smart grids, and you are part of the smart grid task force at European Commission. But I would say you are a real dinosaur when it comes to PCI lists. You have been one of the first ones to take part on the first PCI list. So things have changed since, and you are welcome to take the floor and bring us into light what are the changes.
Yes. Thank you very much, Zeni, and thank you to the whole EDSO team for bringing up such a relevant topic for discussion, and for giving me also the opportunity to be part of this panel. Yeah, I would first maybe pick up on some of the topics that was already introduced in the first panel. And okay, let's first talk about numbers, because also this title of this panel is also about numbers. So it's something that obviously we cannot be proud of. From 2013 until 2017, more or less, the number was between 3 and 4 projects, and then we had a sudden jump in 2019. The PCI list, we came even to six projects, and 2021, which is now under project promoters. They are preparing their project proposals, and then it will be the evaluation process. We don't expect major changes, so more or less it will be the same number. But rather than number, I would focus more about the type of projects. So for instance, earlier calls back in 2013, they would include projects focusing on smartening the electricity grid by way of increasing its monitoring and control capabilities to tackle various technical issues, over voltages, congestion problems, congestion management, and all that to avoid risk curtailment. But more recent calls, they do address first sector integration, even before the proposal for the TENI was out there. So the sector integration has been acknowledged by the project promoter. They do see the value to increase efficiency, but also to provide flexibility services from resources along different sectors. So from the electric vehicles, electrification of the heating sectors, and so on. And also we do see projects focusing on development of data platforms or integrating data hubs from DSOs, TSOs, or even across borders. And all that also for provision of cross-border flexibility. And with that, which would ultimately support regions and countries' national targets for REST deployment, but also it will increase market and network operational efficiencies. It will integrate markets, also the retail ones, and at the end also empower consumers, because at the end of the day, the TENI, it's also about integrating the behaviors and actions of all grid users. And by empowering, I mean also not only managing their own electricity usage, but also becoming a real active market player by providing flexibility services, not only to the TSOs, but even across borders. So with all that, we do see the need to open up our thinking of what we mean by cross-border impact or cross-border smart grid projects. And I think this is one of the two main barriers in the current TENI that many project promoters that when they came with the idea, we want to propose, to prepare a proposal, but we do have this problem with cross-border impact. How do we demonstrate a cross-border impact if it is not physical interconnection in place? So we see that cross-border impact, it does not necessarily has to be linked with the physical interconnection. It can be also about having infrastructure on both sides of the border, and with that ultimately having an impact on the interconnection itself, and with some of them being even underutilized. So with that, you increase the utilization of certain interconnectors by providing cross-border provision of flexibility, for instance. So that's the first thing. But then I also want to stress again that the increasing need of flexibility, and that's another keyword that definitely I think it will be something that the value of future smart grid investment would tap into. And with that also, one more last thing on the TSO-DSO cooperation. I remember back in 2013, there were some project promoters coming to us sort of complaining it's difficult to get on board the transmission system operators. They would not like to share the investments with us. Or I think back then there was not a real need or not that much as today of cooperating TSOs and DSOs. Nowadays, I think it's not a choice anymore. It's a necessity, and it will be even more apparent in the future. So all these, let's say, 2 or 3 key aspects, with having this in mind, I'm very positive about the future developments of the smart grid projects of common interest in the context of the TENI. But one more point on the numbers. I mean, certainly we welcome more numbers, more projects of smart grid projects of common interest. But I think it's more about having the right projects there, and this was already mentioned in some of the meetings within the smart grid thematic group. So we want to make sure that the right signals are there and the barriers are removed, and we need to be open for new ideas. And I really welcome Thomas, what he said, that already the current TENI, it's quite open. I mean, perhaps I still sense, it's incredible, but after 8 years already, so from 2013, I still sense some misunderstanding on the criteria. So most of the discussions are about, it has to be 10 kV and up, it has to be 20% at least of renewables in the region, 300 gigawatt hours and so on. But this was only linked linked with a specific type of projects when they happen on the territory of one member state, and then the impact has to be shown across border. But when we have investments happening at both sides of the border, then obviously it has to be medium voltage and higher, but we do not have this additional criteria of 20% renewables and so on. Though now in the revision, I think this specific criteria is removed. But I even now, I still believe, as it is, there is a lot of potential that was somehow misunderstood or project promoters were discouraged to come forward with their ideas. But now, even with the revision and with this ever-increasing need of flexibility and having cross-border smart grid projects, I think we are ahead of exciting times, and I'm positive that the future lists will include more projects and the right projects. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. And we would like to join your optimism about the next PCI list. Hopefully more smart grid projects will benefit. So far, it's a very low number. We will discuss that when the Q&A session will be open to all of you, of course. Wolfgang, I would like to hear from you. You have heard the previous contributors. What is your perception of the PCI list? How that we can benefit better, and what is the DSO role in those? Can we benefit? Can we have, considering the new revision, is there any more incentives to use the PCI list from your perspective?
Thank you, Tseni, for giving me the floor and for having me in this very, very interesting discussion today. Let's start by saying that what the key issues are with smart grids as we see them. I myself have been dealing with the 10E regulations ever since 2008, so I've seen like several iterations of this regulation. Do have some personal experience in this. So, well, smart grids, first of all, just a very basic stock taking. Smart grids are not part of the TOI-NDP process, the 10-year network development plan process, but they are subject to a parallel assessment in the PCI or throughout the PCI process. Secondly, so this is, let's say, a first issue that one should keep in mind. The second issue is that in the 10E process, or in the PCI process, actually, you need to demonstrate a cross-border effect. And again, talking about local grids, mostly smart grids, we're talking about distribution grids. It can be well, quite challenging to to put it mildly, to demonstrate a cross-border effect. So you need a cooperation typically between TSOs and DSOs, and possibly across the border in a rather confined geography. So there again we have a rather like a restriction of where you could actually have smart grids in the PCI process or in the 10E process. So far, ever since the current 10E regulation, we've only seen 4 smart grid projects being actually financed. We're talking about a synchro grid between Slovenia and Croatia. We're talking about a smart border initiative between Germany and France, the Danube in-grid or in-grid between Slovakia and Hungary, and I think Tomáš Šipoš just talked about that, and another smart grid initiative on integrating well, the Czech and the Slovak variable renewable energy resources. So we haven't seen much, in fact. Now, so as we see it, there are several issues that have brought have determined this situation, and I think there are 3 main areas where we could work on. So firstly, it is, and I think Tomáš just talked about this a little bit, we have the issue of regulated versus non-regulated assets. So currently, basically all smart grids are actually regulated assets, and you would run into extreme difficulties into bringing in non-DSO investments into grids as part of, or as complements, or in a complementary way to smart grids. But then again, you have the logic of CEF finance, that is that if it is a non-regulated asset, even if it's integrated into the grid, then you don't have access to CEF finance. On the other hand, if it is a regulated asset, then you have the non-profit rule. And with the non-profit rule, and I think Rika just quite eloquently made the case, you decrease the profitability of your assets because, or actually of your company, because you have to exclude those assets from the regulatory asset base, and even if you, as in some jurisdictions, we have regulatory incentives, you could quickly bump into state aid issues if, for instance, the national regulator would allow for the regulated DSO or any investor of a regulated asset to have a part of the recognized tariff revenue as part of its profit. So I think we would have to tackle this thing here. So regulated versus unregulated assets. Then the second point is you have another issue here between publicly owned and listed companies, be it DSOs, TSOs, or other investors. So if you have a publicly owned, say DSO or TSO, the profitability issue is rather dominant in deciding whether to invest resources into a CEF project because of the things that I just mentioned. On the other hand, if it is if you have a listed company, you would certainly have difficulties in investing. If you have a publicly, say 100% publicly owned entity, then probably the public interest versus profitability question would be resolved in favor of public interest, saying by public interest, you could argue it is like lower tariffs or better quality of service and so on. So again, publicly owned versus listed companies, I think, again, here you have, there is, well, the 10E regulation doesn't really give justice to these two business models, and again, it determines a rather limited investment from listed companies versus publicly owned companies. And finally, the question of tariff affordability. So far, the 10E regulation has really put very much value on the question of tariff affordability, being tariff affordability, the amount by which, thanks to a contribution from CEF, tariffs or grid access tariffs would not increase. And so you have basically a preference for investing into small systems where the 10E or the CEF contribution is largest because per say unit of energy distributed or transported, the tariff effect of the CEF control, the CEF finance is largest. So these are the issues that we have identified. I'm sorry, however, I don't have a good answer on how to overcome these. We are currently, as we speak, tweaking the Commission's proposal, in part also to address these issues. This is what I can signal here from my side, but happy to continue the discussion with the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today. Very much appreciated. We are running a little bit out of time, and being conscious of that, I would just pick 2 questions for the participants. And I really thank you all the participants for staying with us a little bit even ahead of time. So the one that I would like to address this question either to Ricard or to Julia. In your opinion, the Commission recast proposal sufficiently consider cross-border smart grid project? And what do you think about connecting generation and demand at the medium voltage level in a border region?
Yeah, maybe I can start on that one. I mean, we already saw this kind of examples in the past. There was, if I'm not wrong, Smart Border Initiative project. They were having this more regional or local focus, and they ended up being on the list. So that's also possible. Also, we have, I think, even in one of the projects where Thomas is participating, it's either Danube Grid or Acon. I think they do also acknowledge this, and they built their project idea also on having a cross-border impact at the medium voltage level. So this is what I was saying before. I mean, obviously, it has to be a large-scale project. I mean, we are not addressing low-voltage network projects, but there is also a lot of potential out there at the medium voltage and higher. And I think I also wanted to make now to add something else that comes to my mind. I think the project idea has to come out of the needs. So the investment needs in the region, and by working together across border, you already have benefits from that. And one example of that is, for instance, the Syncrogrid project. It was a project that was in 2015 on the list. So sorry, it's a bit out of the question that you posed, Danny, but I just wanted to stress here what is the value of TSO, DSO. So the project promoters, they first saw the challenges in the project area, and they, instead of going separately, installing smart grid solution on each side of the border, they ended up looking at the whole project area and optimizing the locations by using all the flexibility resources in the whole project area. So they saw that it's much cheaper to look into the whole region and to see where this smart grid investment has to be installed, rather than having a separate solution. So even before applying for the PCI and getting the CEF funding at the end. So I think the real value is just looking and working together on common challenges in the project area. And that's what TANI advocates for at the end of the day. I don't know if Ricard has something else to add.
Oh, I don't have anything more to add, because, yeah, I agree. I mean, it is already possible, as you just mentioned, with these projects.
Great. I would leave the floor to Lisa very shortly. Just Lisa, you mentioned the citizens, and we are curious actually to know how to ensure that all citizens can access the benefit from smart grids projects. Can you please end up with a short notice on that?
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. Sorry, it took a second to turn on my mic. No, I was really thinking about that question, because smart grids bear huge potential, and I'm actually not sure whether it's been mentioned, but yeah, I think in the first panel around sector integration, you know, across to transport and so on and so forth. But I think there's a few elements that we need to think about to make sure that it really, you know, those benefits really come to the citizen. I think the first element is around not everyone will be able to afford smart appliances at home, or, you know, electrification of their homes, electrification of transport systems. So I think there is something to be thought about. And these are the benefits ultimately connected to smart grids. So I think there is something to be thought about how to ensure that all Europeans can choose those options if they so wish, and that we don't only leave it to sort of, you know, whoever can afford to switch systems and then benefit from price differentials and so on can do it, because I think that will undermine legitimacy of the transition. I think another related aspect is that at the moment, you know, once you have your smart grids and you have your smart meters at home, I think actually, or also when it comes to industry, the role of the price signal is actually limited by the fact that a lot of the network costs are you know, smoothed across consumers, and so the network costs are a big part of the final price consumers are paying, which means that the price signal that you get from shifting consumption and sort of the price benefit you get from shifting consumption is actually limited at the moment. So I think that's something where we need a bigger rethink, both in terms of energy taxation this year, but also in the broader question around who pays for infrastructure, because otherwise we're sort of limiting the effect smart grids and then the smartening of consumption goods can have on the system, and in turn the benefits the consumer take away. So these are a couple of thoughts for the discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank to all the panelists for the fantastic contribution today. Thank you for joining us, and I will leave the floor for the conclusive remark to Mr. Buchel. Please, Christian, you have the floor.
You can hear me? Yes?
Yes, we do.
Yes, okay. Thanks very much, Zeni, for having organized the event and moderating. It was a very, very interesting meeting. I said in my introduction and welcome speech, I said thanks to all panelists. After this very interesting discussion, I say a double or triple thanks, because all the inputs and very interesting, smart, sometimes challenging, yes. Thanks very much, all of you. And I would also say about this discussion, we have seen that regulation from ACER on a European level to each NRA regulator in each country, they have a key role. It has been said by several panelists, yes, because the tariff is in the middle of the game, and yes, we just discussed about citizen. This tariff has to I say they have to mitigate the acceptable price for all grid users, of course the consumer, but also the generators, how they access to the grid, etc. And the tariff has also to make the investment possible for all the investors. Are they private investors or public investors? It depends sometimes of the culture of our countries. But the tariff has this double role to make the investment possible and by being acceptable for the grid users. Let me also thank the Commission, as we have as DSO industry in Europe, we have very deep and discussions and continuous discussion with the European Commission, and they are totally aware of the role the industry of DSO and all the partners. Yeah, I'm very happy that a lot of partners attended this meeting. Thanks to the Commission for your support, or for the way you handle and giving us the power we do need to achieve the goals, the political goals fixed by the Commission. So thank you all for this very interesting webinar. Thanks to the team of EDSO. Have a very nice afternoon.
Thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.